I think of a lot of people that you run across day to day who might be helping someone that you notice, strangers that you see that lend a helping hand or open a door, whatever it may be. Those qualities are things that people notice. Don't know if they absorb it all the time, but if you're open to it, you can see leadership in almost every moment of your life.
Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Sam. Good to be here.
As I mentioned before, just very interested in general, the topic here is leadership, and interested in, the images you have, from your youth and kind of some of the people that formed your, foundations of influence and leadership and that sort of thing, kind of, growing up, moving through college, first job, with all the stuff that you wound up doing with ComDisco and then finally into politics. It's really just kind of, your life story as it applies to leadership, kind of things that you hold to be important, whether we're referring to individuals that other people may know from history or from, kind of the news or whatever, or just people that are very personal in your life that, made a big impact on you. So,
It's so funny because you just said leadership as you're growing up, and I hadn't thought about this in a long time, but it began with a stickball game where usually the two best guys would choose sides, and nobody ever wanted to be the last one chosen.
yeah.
And I can remember one day where this one guy who couldn't play was going to be the last one chosen. And the captain of the team, when he ended up being the last one chosen, went over to him, put his arm around him and said, "Hey, we really need you in order to win today." Now, they lost, but
How old was this?
this would be 11, 12 years old. And you play stickball in the street growing up in the Bronx, but I hadn't thought about that till you just mentioned it.
Yeah.
There was a sign of leadership that somebody came out and said, "Hey, I care," and allowed that person to at least feel that they were going to be participating.
It's interesting. It's sort of like even at like age 11, and even though you probably didn't want this guy on your team, right? But
In fact, I didn't choose him.
yeah. So you were one of the
I
captains.
was the other guy.
You were the guy. Yeah, but it's sort of like you went, yeah, there's something to that. I may check back in with that in a few years, but
Well, it just sticks with you because leadership has to do, I think, with listening and the ability to listen and allowing someone else to speak. And that has played out through my business career and just personal life as well. And just that little thing that you kind of kicked off a thing that I haven't remembered in a long time. And I try to think about who that person was, and I can never remember, but I remember the incident.
I'll never forget when I had the opportunity to interview Pete Newell, Olympic gold medal coach, won an NCAA championship, was GM of the Lakers, won an NIT championship, Hall of Fame guy, right? And I remember asking him the question, how do you manage superstars? I mean, just like this. He said, I never spent 1 minute worrying about how I manage superstars, because they're getting recognition from all over, the student body, the press, everything, He goes, I was always much more concerned about the last kid on my bench, like the kid that if he didn't feel connected, if he lost, kind of faith in what he was doing or whatever, he wasn't going to, push it as hard in practice and wouldn't be pushing some of our other players. So, after games, I always made it a real distinct, I made an effort to go over to those guys and say, by the way, these guys are, but if you guys hadn't been doing what you were doing, let me tell you, these guys wouldn't be doing what they're doing. So,
And it's the same thing. It's just allowing, not everybody has the same personality, as you know, and allowing that person that doesn't necessarily raise their hand and or speak out, but if you give them that ability to call a timeout because they have something to say, and everybody turns their attention to them because everybody's on the team together, and that person that looks at the Rubik's Cube in a different way tends to really display a lot of leadership qualities if you give them the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, and again, kind of the age-old question is, are leaders born or made, right? So is that a teachable thing? Obviously, whoever this was, your buddy, the opposing
Right.
captain, it was kind of an intuitive deal for him. But is that sort of a learnable? It's obviously stuck with you, one way or
Well,
another.
I think it is. I think it is teachable. I give you my own circumstance in business.
Yeah.
We were an entrepreneurial company. We were a group of men and women who could do transactions. And we'd eventually going to grow to a real company. But I would sit there and feel that the way I was performing was better than anybody else. So that when I became a manager, what I tried to do is duplicate me. And that's a total failure. And it took me a while to learn that because of the various personalities that you have to deal with.
Yeah.
So I needed to allow others to become a superstar within their own game, within their own ballpark. And we didn't have the training that you see in corporations today. So it was kind of training by hard knocks. And it was a really interesting growth for me to go through to realize that the potential in everybody is just so tremendous.
Mm-hmm. You talk about your parents a lot.
Yeah.
And your dad in particular about, sort of, what was it like, growing up as the kid of a New York City cop? Was he like a Serpico or something, or what was it? What was
He was a tough guy.
What was the TV show? Wasn't there something like your dad was on Mike Douglas for?
Oh no, yeah, he was a guest on the Merv Griffin show.
Merv Griffin, okay.
He and his partner, and it was time of the riots in the '60s that were taking place in the inner city, and my dad and his partner were both white police officers who helped get an African American out of jail. And so that got played up in the press. He was in the front page of the papers, and it turned out he ended up being on the Merv Griffin show because of that. What's interesting is that my father and his partner actually arrested this fella because he fit the description. But in fact, he didn't commit the crime. And he was in jail for over a year, and they worked on all their off-duty hours. We didn't go on vacation that year. They dedicated to finding the person who was the spitting image of the gentleman that was identified for doing the crime.
Boy, that's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible leadership, I guess you might say. But
it'd just be wild to kind of think about that today. Like it'd be great if there was a few more stories like that, rolling around today. But so your dad.
He's a guy that had a third grade education, grew up in Anderson, South Carolina. His ship was sunk in the invasion of North Africa. Half the guys on his ship died, and that generation never spoke about it. They were sort of silent leaders. My dad didn't have this huge, successful business career or make a lot of money. I think the most he ever made in his life was $15,000. But his level of confidence, his ability to allow others, his children in particular, to raise the bar and move on was something that maybe you can't teach. It was inherited and based on his life experiences.
Yeah. Tell the story while I'm thinking about it, about, after 9/11 when you were driving into the city with your father at that time would have been, in his 80s.
Oh, yeah. When that horrible day happened, I was in Chicago. I had moved my parents up about a year prior to that from Florida, and they were living in Connecticut, in our town, but in a townhome. They weren't living with us at that point. And my car was at the airport, and I drove home from where I was overnight, and everybody wanted to be with their families the next day. So I got home about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They came over and, we prayed. We prayed because we didn't know if anyone in the buildings that died were friends of ours. And it turns out there were 5 people in our church who had passed away. Well, the following Saturday, LaGuardia Airport opened up again. So having originally come from the Bronx, my mom and dad jumped in the car and my wife came. We were going to pick up the car at the airport and on the way home, have dinner in the Bronx. And when we approached the Throgs Neck Bridge, as we're going over it, my dad says, "Look, there's a storm coming in." And I said, "No, Dad, that's the smoke that's coming from the World Trade Center." And he didn't say a word. And then I looked over to him a few minutes later, and just tears running down his face. I'll never forget that, because recognizing what he had been through and what his generation had been through, and now to see this, an attack on our own soil, was it was just too much for him to take. But that was that generation. It was a much simpler life at that point.
Yeah. Anybody stick out from your, else from your youth that sort of charted your leadership course, like people you looked up to, things you did?
Yeah, it's interesting because
whatever.
I did a lot of interviewing, and I would ask that same question. And so I'm going to give it to you in a general answer. Invariably, everybody would lead back to the person that listened to them. Those were the most influential people, the people they learned leadership from. Folks that took an interest in who you were and where you wanted to go. And I've been blessed in my life, from my parents to my brother to many, many other people that have come into my life, including priests and Christian brothers and nuns and my wife of 46 years. I forgot. I think they all have lent an ability where I will let others in. And that's how I think you create relationships. That's how you build long-term relationships. So much of what we do in our daily life is in the moment. Mm-hmm. All of those people taught me to look at things long-term.
Okay.
So I think I have a really good sense of what is the effect down the road? What are we building? And that was a theme at our company. We're building something here. So we were always looking down the road, always raising the bar. And the people who have entered my life have taught me that and allowed me to do it myself.
Yeah, when you think of leaders, I want to emulate that, whoever it is. Like, who comes to mind for you,
Well, the standard answer is your father, Jesus, of course, right? But I think of Ronald Reagan, I think was an incredible leader. He was as humble as can be, and I think that's why he was so attractive to so many people. And I think of a lot of people that you run across day to day who might be helping someone that you notice, strangers that you see that lend a helping hand or open a door, whatever it may be. Those qualities are things that people notice. Don't know if they absorb it all the time, but if you're open to it, you can see leadership in almost every moment of your life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There was a woman in our church who had a child that was severely handicapped. And I remember one day where she was attending to this child at the end, but there was a mother with a child that was perfectly fine, struggling. And this woman went over and gave assistance to...
Was consoling or whatever. Yeah.
And that's leadership. Allowing others to really achieve what they're meant to be, the uniqueness of who they are as individuals. I can remember many circumstances where in business you're sitting around and the person who doesn't raise their hand, giving them the opportunity to say something, and you go, oh, why didn't I think of that? Mm-hmm. And just shock everybody on the team that, how did this person come up with that? I didn't expect that from that person.
Yeah.
So leadership needs to be allowed to blossom. And I believe everybody in a given situation is a leader.
There is undoubtedly a question or two that you would have asked yourself that I didn't ask you.
I was just curious if you wonder why I'm such a better golfer than you.
No, I don't, because
Well,
it
have
has
you
to do
seen
with
your
the fact that you play a lot more.
No, it could be that you've never seen your swing on film. Perhaps if you did that, you would understand what I see.
No, I don't want to be, I shouldn't be doing that. No. Well, anyway.
All right, Chief.
Thank you.